Judge Harrison slammed his gavel as the defendant refused to show remorse for the third time that morning. The military courtroom fell silent, except for the rhythmic tapping of his pen against the bench while he studied the graying man in the defendant's chair. Frank Thompson sat with his back straight, hands folded, meeting the judge's glare without flinching. "You call yourself a veteran," the judge said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Real veterans understand duty and respect for authority. What I see before me is a man who thinks his age excuses reckless behavior that endangered civilians." Frank's weathered fingers tightened slightly around each other, but his expression remained calm. The prosecution had painted him as an aging troublemaker who had interfered with a police operation downtown, resulting in property damage and chaos. The charges seemed minor on paper, but Judge Harrison was treating them like capital offenses. "Your service record shows desk duty and logistic support," Harrison continued, shuffling through papers dismissively. "Nothing that would give you expertise in tactical situations. Yet you chose to insert yourself into a dangerous scenario like some kind of action hero. That's not courage, Mr. Thompson. That's the delusion of a man living in fantasies about military glory he never actually experienced." The other veterans in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, but Frank remained motionless. His attorney had advised him to stay quiet and let the legal process run its course. 3 decades of following orders had taught him patience, even when authority figures misunderstood the situation completely. The courtroom doors burst open with such force that the bailiff's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. A woman in crisp military dress uniform strode through the entrance, her silver stars gleaming on her shoulders. The entire room erupted into motion as everyone scrambled to their feet, chairs scraping against the floor in a symphony of sudden respect. "All rise for General Patricia Williams," someone shouted, though protocol had already kicked in automatically. Judge Harrison struggled to maintain his composure while rising from his elevated bench, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected arrival of such high-ranking military authority. General Williams moved with purpose down the center aisle, her polished boots clicking against the tile floor in perfect rhythm. She surveyed the courtroom with sharp eyes that missed nothing, taking in the prosecution table, the gallery of spectators, and finally settling on the defendant's chair where Frank Thompson remained seated. The judge opened his mouth to speak, but Williams raised her hand for silence. She approached Frank directly, stopping precisely 3 feet from his chair. In one fluid motion, she brought her heels together and snapped her right hand to her forehead in the crispest military salute anyone in that room had ever witnessed. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Frank slowly rose from his chair and returned the salute with equal precision, his movements betraying decades of muscle memory that no amount of civilian life could erase. When they both dropped their hands, Williams spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. "Colonel Thompson," she said simply. Judge Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The gavel slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the bench as he stared at the exchange between the 4-star general and the man he had just finished calling a delusional desk jockey. The prosecution team huddled together in frantic whispers, frantically shuffling through their case files with trembling hands. "Colonel Thompson," General Williams repeated, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The title hung in the air like a physical presence, transforming the shabby-looking defendant into something entirely different. Frank straightened his shoulders, and suddenly his calm demeanor looked less like resignation and more like the quiet confidence of a man who had commanded others in life and death situations. "Your Honor," the lead prosecutor stammered, rising unsteadily to his feet. "We were not informed of any special circumstances regarding the defendant's military rank or service record. The file indicates logistics and support roles only." General Williams turned her steely gaze toward the prosecution table, and grown men actually took a step backward. "That file is incomplete," she said with ice in her voice. "Colonel Thompson's full service record is classified at levels you do not possess clearance to access." The gallery erupted in murmurs as spectators tried to process what they were witnessing. Veterans in the crowd began to sit straighter, recognizing the signs of something significant unfolding. Judge Harrison gripped his bench, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist as he realized his authority was being challenged by someone whose rank could end his career with a single phone call. "I request an immediate private conference," General Williams announced. The judge's chambers felt smaller, with General Williams occupying space. Judge Harrison sat behind his desk while the prosecution team crowded against the far wall, looking like school children called to the principal's office. Frank remained standing at attention, his posture revealing the soldier he had always been beneath the civilian facade. The charges against Colonel Thompson stem from his intervention during a hostage situation at the downtown Federal Building last week. General Williams began, her voice cutting through the tension. "Your prosecution claims he interfered with police operations and caused property damage." Judge Harrison cleared his throat nervously. The defendant inserted himself into a volatile situation without authority. Civilians were endangered by his reckless actions. Williams opened a classified folder and placed photographs on the desk. These images show 3 armed suspects holding federal employees hostage on the building's 7th floor. Local police had the building surrounded, but lacked tactical expertise for vertical insertion and room-clearing operations. The lead prosecutor leaned forward to examine the photos, his face paling as he recognized the scope of the situation. "We were told this was a simple disturbance call that escalated. Colonel Thompson neutralized 2 armed suspects and created an escape route for 6 hostages before police tactical units could deploy," Williams continued. "The property damage consisted of 1 broken window and a damaged stairwell door. 0 civilian casualties." Frank spoke for the first time since entering chambers. "The 3rd suspect escaped through the parking garage. He's still at large and considered extremely dangerous." The prosecutor's pen froze mid-sentence as the real implications began to sink in. General Williams spread additional documents across Judge Harrison's desk with deliberate precision. The papers bore classification stamps and security clearance requirements that made the prosecution team exchange nervous glances. Frank's personnel file revealed layers of redacted information that painted a picture far different from the logistics clerk they had imagined. Colonel Thompson commanded Delta Force operations in 3 theaters of combat, Williams explained, pointing to mission summaries that showed successful hostage rescues across multiple continents. His specialty was urban warfare and close-quarters combat in federal and embassy protection scenarios. The judge's hands trembled as he read through citations for valor that included operations he recognized from classified intelligence briefings. Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star with V device for valor, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. The man they had dismissed as a delusional civilian had earned every major combat decoration short of the Medal of Honor. His cover assignment as logistics coordinator provided operational security for sensitive missions, Williams continued. The desk duty notation in his public file was intentional misdirection to protect ongoing classified operations and the safety of his family. Frank remained motionless, but his eyes showed the weight of memories that civilian courts could never understand. Years of decisions made in split seconds where hesitation meant death for hostages and teammates alike. The lead prosecutor set down his pen with shaking hands. "Sir, we had no knowledge of Colonel Thompson's actual service record. Our investigation relied entirely on publicly available information, which is exactly how operational security is supposed to work," Williams replied sharply. The emergency alert klaxon shattered the tense silence in Judge Harrison's chambers. Red lights flashed in the hallway as the bass loudspeaker crackled to life with urgent announcements. General Williams reached for her secure radio, while Frank's military instincts kicked in automatically, his posture shifting from defendant to operational readiness. All personnel remained in current locations. Security breach in progress at Building 7. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. General Williams spoke rapidly into her radio, coordinating with base security while the prosecution team huddled against the wall in confusion. The escaped suspect from downtown had somehow penetrated base security and was now holding personnel hostage in the communications center that controlled all base operations. "Colonel Thompson," Williams said, turning to Frank with the tone of a commanding officer addressing a trusted subordinate. "The suspect has tactical knowledge of our facility layout and security protocols. He's demanding extraction and threatening to destroy critical communications equipment that coordinates air traffic control for 3 military installations." Frank studied the building schematic that Williams pulled up on her tablet. The communications center sat in the building's core, with limited access points and multiple levels of security doors. Standard tactical teams would need extensive time to breach without triggering the suspect to follow through on his threats. "The base commander estimates 40 minutes for tactical deployment," Williams continued. "The suspect has already demonstrated proficiency with explosives and showed no hesitation to use lethal force during the downtown incident." Judge Harrison and the prosecutors watched in stunned silence as Frank transformed before their eyes from legal defendant to military asset. Frank studied the building schematics for 30 seconds before making his decision. "General Williams, I need immediate access to Building 7's maintenance tunnels and a 3-man entry team with breaching equipment. The suspect expects frontal assault through main corridors, but the maintenance access provides direct entry to the server room below his position." Williams nodded and spoke into her radio with clipped military efficiency. Frank turned to Judge Harrison, who sat frozen behind his desk as the courtroom drama transformed into actual combat operations. "Your Honor, these proceedings are suspended pending resolution of this security emergency." The prosecution team pressed against the wall as Frank moved with sudden purpose toward the door. His civilian clothes couldn't hide the predatory grace of a man who had spent decades moving through hostile territory. The years of retirement fell away like a discarded costume as muscle memory and tactical training reasserted control. "Colonel Thompson," Williams called as they moved through the courthouse corridors. "The suspect has intimate knowledge of base security protocols. Intelligence suggests he may have inside assistance or extensive reconnaissance capabilities." Frank paused at the building's exit, scanning the perimeter with eyes that automatically cataloged sight lines and potential ambush points. "Then we treat this as a compromised operation with multiple hostiles until proven otherwise. Standard 360 security and assume electronic surveillance has been penetrated." Judge Harrison followed them outside, watching in amazement as the man he had condemned as a reckless civilian began issuing tactical orders that seasoned soldiers accepted without question. The defendant had become the commander. Frank led the 3-man team through the maintenance tunnels beneath Building 7, moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive through countless similar operations. His breathing remained controlled despite the confined space and emergency lighting that cast eerie shadows on the concrete walls. Behind him, Sergeant Martinez and 2 corporals followed his hand signals with complete trust. The tunnel access point positioned them directly beneath the communications center where 8 base personnel remained hostage. Frank checked his watch and whispered into his throat microphone. "General Williams, we have visual on the server room. Suspect positioned above us with clear sight lines to all hostages. Explosive device confirmed on primary communications array." Through his earpiece, Williams responded with terse updates. "Base tactical team is in position for coordinated breach in 6 minutes. Air traffic control reports increasing aircraft backlog due to communications disruption. Time factor critical." Frank examined the ceiling access panel that would bring them up behind the suspect's position. The hostage taker had chosen his location with tactical expertise, controlling multiple entry points while maintaining threatening proximity to both personnel and critical equipment. Any conventional assault would likely result in casualties. He turned to Sergeant Martinez and gestured toward the explosive charges they had brought for emergency door breaching. The plan required precise timing and absolute silence until the moment of execution. Frank had run similar operations dozens of times, but never with civilian lives depending on decisions made by a military court defendant just minutes earlier. Frank counted down from 5 on his fingers before removing the ceiling panel with surgical precision. The suspect stood 20 feet away with his back partially turned, assault rifle trained on the cluster of terrified communications personnel huddled near the equipment racks. The improvised explosive device blinked red on the primary server array, counting down with mechanical inevitability. On Frank's signal, Sergeant Martinez created a diversion by tossing a flashbang grenade down the main corridor. The suspect spun toward the sound just as Frank dropped silently through the ceiling opening. 3 decades of close-quarters combat training compressed into 4 seconds of lethal efficiency as Frank closed the distance and neutralized the threat before the hostage-taker could react. The explosive device continued its countdown with 47 seconds remaining. Frank's hands moved across the detonator with the steady confidence of someone who had disarmed similar devices under fire in 3 different war zones. His breathing never changed as he identified the trigger mechanism and isolated the primary circuit while his team evacuated the hostages through the maintenance tunnel. General Williams, suspect neutralized and device secured. Frank reported into his microphone as the timer stopped at 12 seconds. 8 hostages safe and communications array intact. No casualties. Judge Harrison arrived with base security just as Frank emerged from Building 7, escorting the final hostage to safety. The man who had sat quietly in the defendant's chair 20 minutes earlier had just prevented a catastrophic attack that would have disrupted military operations across 3 states. The courtroom atmosphere had completely transformed when proceedings resumed an hour later. Judge Harrison sat behind his bench with the demeanor of a man who had witnessed something that shattered his understanding of the world. The prosecution table remained empty as the lead attorney had requested emergency dismissal of all charges pending review of new evidence. General Williams stood at attention as she addressed the court with formal precision. Your Honor, Colonel Thompson's actions today prevented a catastrophic attack on critical military infrastructure. His intervention saved 8 lives and preserved communications capabilities essential to national security operations across 3 installations. Frank sat in the same defendant's chair, but everything about the room's energy had shifted. The gallery filled with base personnel who had heard about the rescue operation, and their expressions showed the respect reserved for genuine heroes. Judge Harrison struggled to find words that could bridge the gap between his earlier condemnation and current reality. The charges of reckless endangerment and interference with police operations are hereby dismissed with prejudice, Harrison announced, his voice carrying none of its earlier authority. Colonel Thompson, this court owes you an apology for questioning your judgment and character. Master Sergeant Davis rose from the gallery and spoke without permission. Sir, Colonel Thompson saved my daughter during the embassy evacuation in Kandahar 12 years ago. Half the men in this room owe their lives to operations he commanded. Similar testimonials began flowing from veterans throughout the courtroom as Frank's legendary reputation emerged from decades of classified silence. General Williams called the courtroom to attention as she produced a ceremonial flag that had been retrieved from her staff car. The judicial proceedings had evolved into something unprecedented as base personnel continued filing into the gallery to witness what had become an impromptu recognition ceremony for a living legend. Colonel Thompson's service record includes 47 successful hostage rescue operations across 4 continents, Williams announced to the packed courtroom. His tactical innovations became standard operating procedures for special operations forces worldwide, and his leadership saved countless American lives during the most dangerous missions of the past 3 decades. Judge Harrison descended from his bench and approached Frank with the humility of a man confronting his own profound misjudgment. Colonel, I spoke from ignorance and prejudice when I questioned your character and service. This court failed to recognize the hero sitting before us. Frank stood and accepted the judge's offered handshake with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout his ordeal. Your Honor, You judged based on the information available to you. That's what judges are supposed to do. The prosecution team had returned to witness the ceremony, and the lead attorney stepped forward with visible emotion. Sir, we will ensure that your heroic actions today are properly documented, and that this legal proceeding reflects the truth of your service and character. Spontaneous applause erupted from the gallery as General Williams presented Frank with a commendation for his actions during the base security crisis, adding another decoration to a career that had already earned every honor the military could bestow. 3 weeks after the courtroom ceremony, Frank Thompson returned to his quiet civilian life, but the base community would never forget what they had witnessed. The story of the defendant who became a hero spread through military circles nationwide, inspiring countless discussions about hidden valor and the danger of judging by appearances. Judge Harrison submitted a formal letter to his superiors requesting additional training on military service recognition and recommending policy changes to prevent similar judicial mistakes. The prosecution team implemented new protocols requiring thorough background investigation before proceeding with cases involving veterans. Frank's actions had saved more than just 8 hostages that day. His intervention prevented a communications breakdown that would have grounded military aircraft across 3 states and compromised national security operations spanning multiple time zones. The ripple effects of his tactical expertise touched thousands of lives that would never know his name. General Williams ensured that Frank's heroism received proper recognition at the Pentagon, where his latest commendation joined a classified collection of honors that told the story of American special operations excellence. The man who had been dismissed as a delusional civilian was now studied as a case example in military academies. The courtroom where Frank had faced condemnation became a symbol of redemption and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize true character. His legacy reminded everyone that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized until circumstances demand their courage. Have you ever been misjudged based on appearances? Share your story about when someone's true character surprised everyone in the comments below.